Hey, we're back going over long-term athlete development, and today's mini lecture is looking over at pillar number 4. Number 4 talks about the benefits of early sport sampling versus sport specialization. And so the goal of everyone that's involved in long-term athlete development, supporting this aspect of movers across a lifespan with fundamental motor skills, we want to encourage our kids to sample different types of movements in sports because it enhances and promotes a broad range of motor skills. And so here's a few things that we know. Sampling, it's an approach that encourages a variety of activities or sports. And so I want to emphasize that this isn't just playing a bunch of different leagues or a bunch of different taking a bunch of different types of sports, like you have to do volleyball one season and then basketball the next season. It has to be organized team sport. That's not the case whatsoever. We want a variety of movements. So that could be some organized team sport. Maybe it's some individual sport. Maybe it's just some lessons. Maybe it's a mini workshop that your child goes to that allows them just to try something. So this is a variety of activities and or sports. And then within a certain sport, we also want to encourage a variety of positions. So in a lot of our team sports, we'll have positions and we'll start to see some specialization of position even at really young ages. And it's not appropriate. We want them to sample a variety of the different roles that exist within that game itself. So a few things about sampling. One of the things we know that there's evidence that supports is sampling at a young age facilitates a longer sporting career than if the student or the athlete or the mover specializes at a younger age. And this makes sense with the second bullet, increases chances of having just longer participation in lifetime physical activity, which we know even beyond the competitive years, that this is an essential aspect of health and well-being. And what we also know is that sampling does not restrict the development for elite athletes. And so we know there's evidence that backs up that if a child or a youth mover sample sport at a young age, it isn't going to restrict their potential for becoming an elite athlete in a particular sport. Specialization, this is where a mover participates year-round in a single sport and it's intensive training. And it's especially at the exclusion of the others. So we just talked about a variety of activities, doing team, doing individual, doing lessons, like something that's maybe like martial arts or doing like a yoga for kids class or yoga for teens experience. It's at the exclusion of these others. And some major concerns we have with specialization. 100% we see association with increased injury. This is really key. We've already talked about motor skill portfolio. We see a blunting. This is a delayed development in a mover's overall motor skills when they're specializing in one sport because they're not getting that variety of movement forms. And then we see later on in life this reduced standard of functional motor skills. And I can attest to this completely when my eyes were opened up to this much more for a while. A lot of my coaching career, I coached youth and teen or adolescent athletes. And it wasn't until I started just going into sport performance and coaching CrossFit, just that's for everyday people in a really, really good CrossFit gym that was developmental and had great just support for movers who were adult age. But I was just shocked and I didn't realize that there's so many adults out there that didn't have a good foundation in fundamental motor skills when they were young for whatever reason. And then they're coming in and as an adult and wanting, to do running and doing workouts with jump roping in them and, things like box jumps and, maybe it's doing a medicine ball, wall ball throw against the wall. And it's not even just the strength or the stamina that they're not well developed. It's some of the motor skills it takes to do some of these. So to throw a medicine ball throw against the wall and then to be able to catch it again in repetition in sequence, that's not related to their fitness necessarily. That was a lot of the time related to their motor skill, being able to catch and throw and feeling comfortable with that. And so I can attest to that it does come back later on in life and impacts ability or someone's confidence and their competence in just doing other activities that they might want to do. The major consequences we see in overtraining, so not just the physical injury, but this is going to come through in some of our psychosocial or emotional aspects of overtraining, especially burnout or dropout. And so that's something I always want to make sure I emphasize to people who are asking questions. They feel pressure for their young athlete to specialize at a young age, to try and make it big, and to get to these select teams when they're preteen or teen. And I always caution, your kid is young, and who knows if they're even going to want to continue in this sport to this hypothetical or elite level that the league or the club is trying to sell you on. And so we have to keep that in mind. These are still real human beings that we're dealing with at this really young specialization age, and they change their minds. And sometimes they choose to participate in things just because their friends are doing it, or they choose to not participate in something because their friends are not doing it. And so we have to keep in mind there's a lot of variables that go into why someone wants to do something. And then this is another big one, is non-guarantee. It's not guaranteed that because your kid takes every lesson and every specialized hitting coach and has a private strength and conditioning coach and plays in every league they can and plays year round, you can't guarantee that they're going to become an elite. There's specific things that go into just qualities of achieving elite performance and even maintaining that, and beyond just genetics and kind of the innate talent that someone has and the opportunities, the desire to even perform at that level. There's a ton of variables that can get in the way. And so this idea that if I do X, Y, and Z, my kid will be X, Y, and Z elite athlete, there's so much more that happens in that meantime, and it's never a guarantee. So why do people specialize? Why do parents, why do coaches encourage this? And everyone wants this. We all want a higher standard of performance for ourselves, for the people around us. We want everyone to achieve their best. And so that in itself is really not a bad thing, but we have to know the underlying reason. There's some ego that comes through this. So this idea of being on a more select team versus a recreational team or just like a city league team. And even this prestige of being on a national team, being able to represent our country is a huge honor. And so there's a lot of lure of these high level things. College scholarships is one of the biggest reasons that people will specialize, and especially at the sacrifice of things like study time for their middle school kid or high school kid, or they'll get 6 supportive coaches and lessons, but they won't get a tutor for their kid. And so when they're talking about, this is the only way my kid's going to get to college, there's other routes to get college scholarships that aren't only athletics. And we know that we're somewhere between 1% and 2% of kids that are playing sport are going to get that college scholarship. And we also know that a lot of times people see college as just kind of a speed bump in the road to professional league. And again, knowing what we know, the risk of injury is higher, that burnout, like the kid and the athlete has to just really want to perform at that high level. And the way that there's a lot of controversy, I'd say right now, and I guess especially we see in college football, in terms of, is college even necessary? Should we pay college athletes and just stop pretending that they are student athlete? And so there's a lot of challenge that comes through with this overhype that goes to getting a scholarship for college, and even the weight or non-weight or the prestige or speed bump without prestige that we put on the college sport or college athlete experience. And then we see, at the highest level, money is a big driver. And so we see the professionals that we love to watch, and we see what they do. We see what the brands they represent and really the economy of sport. And there's a huge lure of that, and thinking that, okay, if my 8-year-old shows some talent, maybe they could be the next pro athlete on the commercial and endorsing all these products. So we have some issues, some faulty reasons or faulty also backings of why specialization has gotten so big. Several decades ago at this point, there's a recommendation that came out for mastery, and it came from the music world, performance world. And it was this concept that we had to have 10,000 hours to be able to essentially master, quotes, master something. And so if we break that down, that comes out to approximately 3 hours a day over the course of 10 years. And so there is a huge misinterpretation that came out of this data from the authors, and they later came back and not necessarily retracted what they said, but said the data that they put out was misinterpreted. It was really 5,000 hours of practice to achieve mastery. And because of that 10,000 hour number has been thrown out there, people just see that as, okay, that's 3 hours a day, 10 years. Okay, age 6 through 16, you need to be in this sport or with a hitting coach or with a strength coach. It has to be 3 hours a day. And that's a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 13-year-old. 3 hours a day, that's the level of training that a college athlete does, or even a professional athlete in certain parts of their season does. And a lot of emphasis got put onto this quantity as opposed to the quality of the practice. And we have to keep in mind, practice and hours in a sport doesn't necessarily mean playing, like on the field, physically active. When we talk about quality of practice, that includes recovery, that includes cognitive aspects of training and performance, that includes psychological aspects of training and performance. And so one of the things we see is that current data that we have doesn't support just this 10,000 hour transition in a linear way from entry level to elite in just this straight line as long as you put in the hours. It's not like that. And so we are encouraging ourselves, parents, other coaches, even kids, young athletes, to really understand what quality of practice versus just spending a lot of hours doing it or having a long schedule or having long practices. It's not going to necessarily do it. One of the other major faulty influences we see is called this success distortion called proxy success. And so that's often put on by parents, coaches, or even athletic boosters, and where some early talent might be identified in a young mover. And the ambition really comes from the proxy person, from the other person, and the peer and the social pressure that especially parents are feeling when their kids are young, and from the other parents or from leagues. They want their kid to have every opportunity to be successful. The pressure to put them in high specialized experiences is really strong. A lot of parents have come to me and just asking for help and how do they navigate this system. So non-specializing, what does the data say? So we just talked about linear entry. So we know that there's a minimal percentage of correlation of linear entry, this linear path into elite with specialization. And so when we look at elite adult performance, the data says that greater intensity of training when it's not until the end of adolescence, that better predicts elite performance in the adult world. Greater volume not happening until early adulthood. That's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's where volume should be increased. That's where we see a greater elite performance. And then in our objective sports, so these are ones that are measured in time or distance or mass. So things like weightlifting, powerlifting, track and field, running sports, later specialization and lower volume of specific practice in their early life correlates to more elite performance in the adult years when they've reached physical maturity. So sport sampling, we see better coordination and broad jump amongst boys that are pre-adolescent. And we see with our early adolescence, we see kids that played through more sports at this early adolescent stage were more likely to make national competitive teams in their upper adolescence versus just playing a club standard. And so a few other notes on injury. The risk increases. It's repeated loading on the musculoskeletal system in the submaximal way. And then we see not adequate rest, recovery, and especially for young movers, just time for the kid to grow. We see greater injury of knee, or greater rate of knee injury, patellar tendinopathy, Osgood-Schlatter. These are really common things we see in young movers, especially in single sport. And then greater risk for serious overuse and acute injury. So this is beyond just our overtraining injuries. Greater risk for serious injuries, things that might require being out, having surgery, more so than even collision. And the most influential risk factor was overuse versus any other risk factor. So heightened risk, single sport versus multi-sport. If there's more hours of organized sport participation than the mover's age, there's heightened risk. If the free play to organized playtime ratio exceeds 2-to-1, we see a heightened injury risk. And if we see over 8 months a year of organized single sport training, heightened injury risk. And then training volume, even for 16-year-olds at 1 hour per age, if it's over 16 hours a week, we see more injury risk. So we want to make sure that there's more variability, more motor skills,